So we're back in the happy home of our Ubuntu 14.04 desktop, and I hope you can remember that this was our master server. And we'll look at configuring this first with our simple ACL. So I'm in the etc bind directory, and let's go through and take a look at our named.conf.local. So this is where we had defined our own zones. We'd already put an access control list in here that's disallowing the dynamic DNS. So the allow update is set to none. Because we've put it in both zones, we might actually find that it would have been better off adding this through to our options block in the name.conf.options file. In this way, it would apply to all zones unless explicitly overwritten. Now, for the purpose of explanation, we're going to be only working with the example.com for the moment. So I'm just going to go through and add in a directive. And we're going to go allow-transfer. And again, we're going to put none, just so we can prove that this will disallow the zone transfer. Now, of course, that's not the setting we want to leave. We want to allow transfer from the slave server. But because the slave server can already transfer, we're not going to see any difference. And that's the only other machine that I have. So we'll go through and block transfer, for example.com. Now, of course, I don't have to change the zone serial number because I've changed the configuration of the server, not the configuration of the zone. We're just affecting the access control list here. I'm going to go through and use RNDC and a reload. Now when we go through and try and transfer the example.com zone from our CentOS system, I'm hoping it's not going to work. The simplest way to test this is just going to be with the straightforward dig command. We could see that from before this was working, but now we can see that we get the transfer failed. So we're unable to do a zone transfer of example.com from that server because, of course, we've set the access control list. Now, of course, it's not the access control list we ideally want. So let's go through and put the IP address of this host into the access control list. So moving back to the Ubuntu host, re-edit the configuration, and we're going to change our none to be 10.0.2.15. So in my case, this is the IP address of my CentOS host. Obviously, you have to use the IP address of your slave server. So we're going to implement that, and again go through and reload. So we've done the RNDC reload, so that's now our configuration. Moving back then on our CentOS host, obviously I don't need to make any changes here, but I'm now able to carry out the zone transfer. So we're back up and running. But of course, we're not really finished here, or not just yet. Let's gain our administrative privileges. So let's move into the etc directory and let's edit the configuration. So here we have an option, the allow query. So you can see from here, we could then specify that this would work for all zones irrespective. And this is where we're going to go through and put in a new line. And we're going to do the same thing within the options block rather than within the zone stanza. So we're going to go through and allow transfer. And we're going to specify in this one correctly, we want to say none. We're not just doing a simple test here. We want to leave this as our final solution because we don't want anyone doing a zone transfer from this host. Once we're ready, we can go through and save the change. And then we can go through and run our RNDC and reload. Now with this in place, no one's going to be able to do a zone transfer from the CentOS host and only the CentOS host will be able to do a zone transfer from the Ubuntu system. And I say this then becomes a working security solution, however, with the caveat that we're not really authenticating the CentOS server, so we just have to hope it's the CentOS server and not somebody imitating its IP address. And in the same way, when the CentOS server is receiving its information, it's receiving its zone transfer, it doesn't really know if the information has been tampered with. So the next phase is going to be looking at our transactional signatures, or our TSIGs.